We'll go ahead and hit record. For folks trickling in, again, you've got the chat, you've got the Q&A there. Please feel free to type away. These are always way more fun and productive if we have conversations going through it. I'd rather it not just be a monologue here. So feel free to chat, type away, all that good stuff. What I'm going to do is share my screen with you. And I think I can figure out how to share my screen. Let's try this. Can you guys now see a Google Doc here? Oh, and actually now that I'm sharing my screen, I'm not going to be able to see the chat. But I think you guys, if you type in the Q&A, I'll keep that open here to the side. But can you guys just let me know, maybe typing in the Q&A, whether or not, actually I can see the chat too. Can you let me know if you guys can see the screen here? That's going to be kind of necessary. Yes, we can. Okay, thanks, Adrian. Appreciate that. So let's go ahead. Okay, yeah, looks like everyone can see the screen. Cool. Vital Alexander, great. So let's talk about what we are digging into today. So relatively self-explanatory, the No BS three-part process to create graceful movement, mental flexibility, and deep self-understanding. I hope all of those things are relatively self-explanatory. And yes, this presentation is going to be in a Google Doc. You know, that's actually not going to be the only thing that's different about this, because I've done a number of these in the past. I know you've been on a number of these in the past. And there's a typical way that it goes, which is very familiar, right? There's a bit of a humble brag at the start about how great I am. There's 45 minutes of sort of pseudo content that maybe you can do something with. And then there's a pitch for a thinly veiled sales call, right? Where we have a breakthrough session or a discovery call where I discover how big a credit card you have and all of your emotional leverage, and we break through all of the resistance and we have a good time. So what I'd love to do is actually just flip all of that on its head, because it sort of works, but it's sort of boring, not very effective. So if it's cool with you, I'd like to flip the whole thing and just give you the pitch up front, because I assume you're smart enough to know that we can only generalize principles. So what we're going to be generalizing and covering in this presentation are the principles, but the action and the application has to be on an individual level. Go figure, you don't behave as an entrepreneur, age 30 to 50, speaking, you know, all of this stuff, right? You're not a demographic, you're a person. So the pitch is pretty simple. Basically, the 10-minute mind-body map highlights exactly what your strengths are and what your weak links are, what the opportunities are for growth. Some of you guys have been through it already. You can speak to how insightful it can be. So if you go through this, if you take 10 minutes, basically what I'll do is I will record a 5 to 10 minute video for you, basically personalizing a series of practices for you. That's the pitch. So again, I'll remind you at the end when we wrap up, but you can go to the link, chandlerstevens.com/10m3, and that'll take you right to it. It's pretty cool. What we do is basically combine a couple of the most scientifically backed assessments of well-being or the mind-body connection and link those into actual movement and embodiment practice for you. So it's kind of fun. And then, oh, some of you guys saw, it's actually, that's wrong. It's 5,000. I added a little something else. So there's a 5,000 bribe that I'll tell you about at the end. But in the meantime, you don't have to worry about it. So you might be wondering why I'm doing it this way. Frankly, it works. Everything you're going to learn here is stuff that my clients are doing every single day, and it's effective. And if you do it, you'll notice some changes too. I want to do a lot less marketing this year. So this whole process is going to help with that. And selfishly, I want to create a bigger pool of better potential clients, people who are like doing what I consider the fundamentals, so that when we work together, we can just do more of the more fun stuff. Yeah. So basically, I want to bias behavior change over a sale. So I want to give you a bunch of stuff, hopefully change your behavior, make you more effective, make you better at doing the things you want to do. And then we can get into a lot cooler stuff later. So hopefully that all clicks. So what we're going to cover today is mainly a bunch of practices, right? That's the most important part, is things you can actually do rather than things you can think about or little reframes, anything like that. I want to give you a bunch of stuff you can do. Granted, we are limited by kind of time span here. So this doc is, you'll see linked with all sorts of things. I'm going to send you this doc afterwards as well, just so you can have it as a reference. So we're going to cover just enough theory too, so that these practices make sense, so that you do have a way to think about these. So you can see how they fit together. But again, I want to bias stuff you can actually do, because go figure, that's where the change happens. So because we've got a lot, you might not catch everything, and that's okay. We're going to make it through. But just some quick assumptions. If you're here, you likely want a little more creative inspiration, more engagement in your work, an overall sense of optimism about your health, a greater sense of vitality, better focus, better attention control, more strength, range of motion, more graceful movement. Go figure, it's in the name. Higher energy levels for your business, greater levels of connection in your relationships. Yeah, is that about right? Maybe could we get a couple of yeses in the chat, or if you have questions, let me know if there's specific things you're looking for too. We might be able to weave that in as well. And again, I can see the chat popping up here. So if it sounds about right, you can let me know. But I'm also willing to bet, because go figure, you're spending an hour on a Sunday morning. If you're here live, that there are some challenges, right? Likely you're not as consistent as you would like to be. Okay, yes, connections is a biggie. Cool. Thanks, Jennifer. I would assume you're either overwhelmed or bored a good chunk of the time, right? Very rarely in the sweet spot, what we might think of as kind of the flow state. I know most people tend to skew toward overwhelm or tend to skew toward boredom. I tend to skew toward boredom, I think, in my life, but we'll cover some strategies to move you more in that happy medium where you are able to meet the world around you in a more effective way. I imagine that your body nags at you on a semi-regular basis, yeah, whether it's aches, pains, tension, that sort of thing. Overwhelm, okay, I see, is kind of a biggie. Your focus and attention, like most of us these days, are likely pulled in 1,000 different directions. There's a reason we're not doing this as like a Facebook Live kind of thing, or an Instagram Live, anything like that, because those are distraction machines that make their money off of keeping us pulled in too many different directions. You've likely seen that I'm not as present on those platforms for that reason. I would imagine you also probably have a bit of internal chatter that isn't helping, right? Whether it's self-doubt, we might call it any number of things, limiting beliefs, certain attitudes, different perceptions, but the internal mind game isn't working so well. And you likely know that you could be performing better in a broad variety of domains if you could sort this stuff out. And I imagine that gap is pretty frustrating. I've been there. I've lived that. Everything I'll be sharing with you is stuff that I do and practice and have done, and it's actually how I've gotten to where I am a good chunk of the way. So is that still on track? Yes, broadly? Okay, cool. So let's figure out how to get you out of this situation then. Real quick bio, because I know that some of you are more familiar with what I do and who I am than others. My name is Chandler Stevens. I have the best mustache in the movement game. Formerly, I was a research scientist at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, involved in microbiological research. I jumped ship kind of on ethical grounds. I was tired of the bureaucracy, the red tape, the talking more than doing, and I wanted to do. So I opened up a movement studio, eventually transitioned more into the world of embodiment teaching, more so than movement coaching. At this point, I run a relatively small, pretty high-end coaching practice, historically clients in about 27 different countries. So kind of cool as a one-man operation for the most part. And there's one, I say we have an important question. There are two important questions, but the one most important question that has really kind of governed and directed my work over the past few years has been, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Go figure. If you know what to do in a situation, you don't have to think about it much. You do the thing, but there's this ever-present question of what do we do when we don't know what to do? It ends up being a little bit more important, because all of our growth is going to occur past the stuff that we don't know what to do and how to do. So what do we do in that case? Well, we learn, right? So that's a good deal of what we're going to be talking about here, is how you learn more effectively, whether that's movement, whether that's ways of thinking, all of that. But the important question for us to start off this particular presentation is, what separates the people that we might consider high performers from a group that we might consider gifted underachievers? People who, for all intents and purposes, should be doing really well and yet aren't. That's a pretty important question. And there's a big body of research looking into this in athletics, in business, in academics, in careers. We can see that there's a grouping occurring, right? There are people who perform really well at the level that they are capable of, and people who by all measures really ought to be doing better but aren't for whatever reason. So again, as I mentioned, big body of research looking at a number of different categories. And the research actually shows, I was editing this late last night and couldn't resist a little Bill Nye. But the research shows that self-regulation is actually the key factor here. Self-regulation is the main trait that separates high achievers from gifted underperformers. And most studies demonstrate that somewhere between a 6 to 9% increase in an intervention leads to significant long-term improvement in performance. For reference, my clients tend to average about a 41% increase. So it's not to say that research is the ideal, right? It tracks these things. It shows us what's possible, but there's a lot more possible too. So the reason why I mentioned that my clients average this bigger jump is because they do a bunch of these things that I'm going to be sharing with you. So I just want to show that if you do these things as well, you're going to experience a lot of really significant changes. Again, it's the doing that matters. So self-regulation, for those who aren't as familiar with the term, it's basically the ability to cope with the world around you, right? To survive, to thrive in what's admittedly a very challenging world at times. It's tempting to plan our lives around the ideal scenario, right? People spend a lot of time visualizing, fantasizing, like spending a lot of time thinking about the ideal of what they would like things to be, but life will not necessarily organize itself around your ideal. And that's a big thing we're going to be talking about, is how we can cope with the challenges of life. Because if we can deal with those more effectively, the good stuff sorts itself out all on its own. So we'll talk about that. And this idea, frankly, isn't new. This idea of self-regulation as kind of the master key, right? There's this line that I think is quite beautiful. I love blending like the science and the art of these things. But Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote this in the poem Oinon in 1829. It's self-reverence, self-knowledge, and self-control. These three alone lead life to sovereign power. And for me, that's just like, it encapsulates all of this, right? If we cherish ourselves, revere our potential, our capability, if we understand what has shaped us and what is shaping us every single day, and we can make deliberate, intentional choices in light of those two things, what else do we need? Like that actually, that's what life is made of. So it's a beautiful encapsulation. And for us, in this ecosomatics work, we have a fundamental practice that we come back to as a way to kind of fine-tune our self-regulatory capacity. And I'd love to guide you guys through that here as well. So we consider it two questions: what now and what next? And it's quite simple. What we focus on is, what are you aware of right here, right now? And you can start with that. Truly, even as you're watching this presentation, what are you aware of right here and right now? Whether that's physical sensations in the body, whether it's perhaps pressure of the surface you're sitting on, the chair, the floor. There are some signals that let you know that you actually inhabit a body, that you are a body here. So what are you aware of? Maybe it's areas of tension. Maybe it's subtle movements of the pulse, the breath. Perhaps it's, again, some mental chatter, some things you're thinking about. Maybe it's a particular feeling you have, whether it's excitement or boredom or curiosity. What are you aware of now? It all must start here, right? And awareness gives us a choice. It affords us an opportunity to make a choice about things. And that's what this question of what next brings to mind, right? So given what you're aware of now, what do you want for yourself? What's one thing you could do that would make you a little bit more comfortable? Even just physically. We can keep it obvious. Given what you notice about your body right here, right now, what's one thing you could do that would make you a little bit more comfortable? And this doesn't have to be some big, profound thing. It could be, my hip is talking to me. I'm going to shift positions over here. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. This is the foundational practice of self-regulation. It's awareness and it's choice. Yeah. When you notice what's going on and you choose to influence those things, you can check back in. Now that you've done that little thing to make yourself a bit more comfortable, what do you notice now? Has anything shifted? And go ahead and let me know in the chat if there was anything you noticed, whether it was something subtle, something significant. I'd love to know if that clicks before we keep trucking along here. So were you guys able to get a sense of that? Even just that, I mean, tiny little shifts can go a long, long way, as we'll see. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, what we're really looking at here is this dialogue between attuning and attending, right? We're attuning to our own organismic needs, our own needs as a body, as a mind, as a person. We're attuning to those, and then we're attending to those. We're taking care of those needs, right? So you can notice these things, address these things, and then you notice the difference. That's the foundation of how change happens. And I'm just going to assume overwhelming enthusiasm and assent, and you guys get this entirely. Yeah, I haven't heard anything otherwise. So awareness shifted from one uncomfortable thing to more expanded awareness. That's awesome, Jennifer. Yeah, quite often we can fixate on some of these little areas of localized discomfort, and we lose the big picture sense we have of ourselves. Go figure, if we can bring more of ourselves to life in these practices, well, we have a little better go of things. So that's awesome. Thanks for chiming in too. Appreciate that. So let's talk about what you are anyway, because this whole presentation is basically going to be looking at, well, ways to self-regulate. So we got to have a little clear sense of what the self actually is. And granted, this has plagued human philosophy since the very start of the nature of the self. So we're going to skip a lot of that and stick with what's relatively obvious, and that's that you are a body, mind, within an environment. Yeah, there's some combination. I mean, you're not just a body, but you are necessarily a body. Yeah, you're not just a body. There's a whole mental world too, and you don't live in a vacuum. You live within an environment, and that environment has a very real influence on you. Yeah, so we respond and adapt to the world around us, both physically and psychologically. Yeah. Now we know, or we can assume at the very least, that when we learn how to harmonize these things, life gets a lot easier. It gets a lot better, but it's actually the opposite way than what most people think. Maybe it's an issue of marketing and advertising. Maybe it's endemic to the whole personal growth and development sort of world in general, but there's this Utopia Syndrome where people think that there's always going to be higher highs and higher highs and the highest highs, and life is going to be this endless journey of nothing but optimism. I was at this event over the summer where a guy actually said he thought we would evolve beyond the sympathetic nervous system. Like we would somehow evolve past what he thought of as negative emotions. And I thought, well, that's challenging. If you're about to get hit by a bus, you might want your sympathetic nervous system. I have a hard time imagining we're going to get rid of everything negative, right? And that's widespread in this industry, that people have kind of deluded themselves into thinking that there will be permanent bliss all the time, and that's just not how these things work. It's not about utopian rainbows and butterflies. Like, again, most people focus on always raising the roof of their life. We can think about two levels. They focus on making the good better, but they don't attend to the floor. And our emphasis really does need to be on raising the floor, because it does not matter how high your highs are if you have crushing, plummeting lows in between those, right? Like, if we think in terms of rolling averages, the good stuff gets balanced out by the bad stuff. And so you're not always going to have more and more and more range of motion, and more and more and more strength, or more and more and more happiness in your life, right? What we can do if we want a better average life overall is reduce the bad stuff. We can raise the floor. We can reduce our risk of catastrophic failure. We can make the bad stuff less bad and suffer better, quite frankly. And then the rolling average improves. Again, when we take care of the limiting factors here, the good stuff sorts itself out on its own. That's not what we need to be worrying about. But a lot of people spend their time focused on that, rather than simply raising the floor. I know that that's not a very sexy idea. It's a little counter to what is most typically out there, but it works. You don't have to take my word on it. You could try it out for 30 days and see for yourself. So let's start with the body. Let's talk about how we can go through this practice with the body. Well, how do we make bodies work better? I'm a big fan of looking at things from the beginning, influenced by Aristotle. He's got this beautiful line: "He who sees things from the beginning has the finest view of them." When we get a sense of the origin of things, we understand a bit more about them. So typically in the ecosomatics work, we look at it from an evolutionary lens, and we look at it from a developmental lens. For the sake of this presentation, we'll look at it from developmental lens. Basically, you began your life as a body, as a single fertilized cell, right? And over time, you divided, differentiated to create systems within systems within systems. And after birth, in your early development, you learned from your environment along the way, right? You learned certain ways of walking and talking and speaking based on the culture, the geographic conditions, like the socio-psychological factors of the world around you influenced you too. You learned from those, yeah. Now, it's important to keep in mind this idea of systems and systems and systems. Complex systems do not behave linearly. What that means is if we can remove one of the rate limiters, like one of the things that is actually inhibiting you, it's not like -1 leads to a +1 bump. It's like if you take away some of the bad, you can get an enormous exponential increase in function and quality of life. Similarly, the bad stuff compounds too. So it's not like you get a bit worse and a bit worse and a bit worse. It's like you get a bit worse and then a bit worse, and then you drop, right? Like you plummet. That's why I want us to emphasize raising the floor here, to avoid those drops and to basically help you make the most of the compounding benefits that the good stuff provides. So just as a visual of like how complex systems might operate, you might consider your body doing similar things to this. Yeah, this is not what you're looking at here, a bunch of birds speaking to each other, not like, hey, let's go here and let's go here and let's go here and let's do this. There's no top-down control on this either. It's not like one bird is making all of the decisions. This is what's known as an emergent phenomenon. Your body operates a very similar way. We'll see that your mind does too. These emergent patterns are what we're looking for. So it's just a beautiful, satisfying thing to look at too. Does this all make sense so far with you guys? Could you let me know that we're tracking this? I haven't lost anyone along the way. If you do have questions, let me know too. I'm just going to assume, since I don't see questions, that this is making sense. So the basic rule of bodies is something known as the SAID principle. It stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand. Basically, it's use it or lose it, with a little bit of nuance, because every cell in your body is going through this use it or lose it adaptation process. Yeah, so it's not just, okay, Christine, very interested in emergent phenomena. Cool, we'll get into that too. Fascinating stuff. Love it, great, all right, cool. So every cell in your body is adapting to these demands too. So it's not just I use my bicep and my bicep adapts. The adaptations that we can see are the emergent phenomena of all of the individual cells in the body adapting together. So all of the big obvious things that we're looking at, like the pattern shifts, right? The patterns in where and how much muscle I have on my body, the patterns in where and how much range of motion I have. These are emergent phenomena based on a series of very tiny little adaptations within all of the different cells of the body, like billions and billions and billions of cells within the body are all adapting to the demands that we're imposing on them day to day. Now, gravity is the primary physical demand that we have to cope with. There are other things like, you know, self-regulation. I'm shifting to a squat right now. Go figure. We have to cope with oxygen in the environment. We deal with light throughout the day too. These are significant physical factors. But gravity is the primary mechanical demand that we adapt to over time. Yeah, it's the ever-present downward pull. There is always a force pulling downward on every cell in your body. This is important. We'll explore that more. If you want to move well, we'll start with the kind of graceful movement idea. You must be mindful of the demands that your body is adapting to. Because graceful movement, ideally, it's characterized by as little effort as necessary. Yeah, as little of the heave and oh to get myself to do these things. That does not scream graceful movement if I have to move myself through space, right? We want a very tight coupling of intention and action to the point where even as I think about getting up from the ground, I get up from the ground. I don't have to worry about, okay, I need to organize myself this way and I better brace my core here and okay, now I can get up that I have my glutes engaged. No, those things organize all on their own. Again, if we think about complex systems, that murmuration of swallows, that beautiful flocking of birds, there was no top-down control. There was no single entity thinking through the organization of that movement. And I don't know about you, I would consider that very graceful movement. Again, our bodies operate very similarly. The patterns of movement that we're looking for are not top-down directives. They are emergent phenomena. Yeah. Now, we can improve the quality of this by stripping away the noise, the nonsense, again, the inhibitors of that movement. So as you can tell, it's not necessarily about doing more of a thing. It is not about doing more reps. It is not about getting more massage. It is not about more and more of whatever. It's about doing things differently, right? What we're looking for isn't a quantitative shift. It's a qualitative shift. Yeah. The swallows in that murmuration are not flapping faster, or it's not add more swallows. It's an organizational problem, right? It's a coordinative problem, and not an additive or a subtractive kind of problem. So as an example, would you try this right here, right now, wherever it is you're sitting? Would you see what it's like to slump, like just let yourself go, kind of slump forward and stand up with this slump, right? And you can see it's not very fun. It's not a good way to do it. And try that, truly, like actually work with this here as we're going through it. If you slump Whether you're sitting on the ground or sitting in a chair, if you slump and come up to stand, you can feel, you catch your breath at a certain point. You stop breathing very early on. You can feel certain parts of your body are not loving that, right? They're tensing, they're contracting to keep you upright within the pull of gravity. Yeah. Are you guys getting a sense of that too? Now you might try the, not necessarily the opposite of that, but unslump yourself. Like whatever you did to slump, simply reverse that and see what it's like to stand from there. And I don't know about you, but it's a very different experience for me going through that. And I hope you guys are able to catch that difference within yourself too. If you're not, or if you have questions about that, let me know, because we can explore that in a lot more depth. But the reason why that slumping feels the way it does, why we would say that that's not a graceful way to do it, is simply because it takes a lot more work to stay upright and to navigate within the pull of gravity. Yeah. If I'm consistently hunched over, my body's having to work harder to resist gravity. That's why so many people get tight shoulders, tight neck, a sore back at the end of the day. It's because gravity's winning against them throughout the day. And their musculature is having to engage all day just to hold them upright. You can imagine, for example, what it would be like to flex your bicep all day. And if your work depended on you flexing your bicep all day, if you getting in the car and driving to work depended on you flexing your bicep all day, I mean, try that too. Like just hold your bicep engaged for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. And you can see that that's exhausting. Like I already don't want to be doing that. For the sake of self-regulation, I want to let go of that contraction. But you can see that if we have a muscle engaged all day, we're burning through a lot of energy. Like that's where your energy levels probably went, is to engaging all of that musculature all day. B, we're creating this horrible lactic acid buildup, and C, we're kind of deadening the connection between the brain and the body, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Christine said, unsumping, there's no catching the breath when I stand. Feels like particles of the atmosphere are lifting me. I love that. Yeah, when we organize well, there is no catch of our breath when we go to change positions. Yeah, that is a hallmark of well-organized, graceful movement. And it feels like the world is supporting you in that movement. Christine, love that. That's incredible. So again, we have the ceiling floor problem. Like when we think about changing the demands of the body, most people will focus on raising the ceiling. Yeah. They will work on their end range strength. They will work on their maximum deadlift. They will work on ideal posture. They will, like all of these things, they'll focus on raising their best to make it better. Yeah. Rather than making their floor less bad. If we can make the bad less bad, we rate, like the rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. So what we must do in order to raise the floor in the situation is address the consequences of our habitual positions. Now, you know what these positions are. If you don't, I'd like to give you a little exercise that you can work through, maybe a bit of a journaling exercise too. If you imagine there is a little bird on the windowsill, I know some of you guys are quite familiar with this, a little bird on the windowsill looking in at you, who sees what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're doing it, with whom you're doing it every single day. And it's not a judgmental bird, but it's a very keen observer of a bird, a very astute bird, who generally has your best interests in mind and will generally call you on your crap. What shapes does that little bird see you making throughout the day? I mean, for a lot of us, we can think of maybe 4 main shapes that we might make. There's chair-shaped, there's lying down, there's standing up, and there's maybe you work on your squat, and that's your 4th main shape. For most of us, we don't have a whole lot of variety within the shapes we make throughout the day. Now, each of those shapes, you can see, I mean, simple example, this shape loads all of the cells of my body differently, right? If I lean over to the right, just as a simple example, every cell in my body is now getting loaded on a different side of itself, yeah? This isn't just about stretching my muscles. This is about changing the cellular loads within all of those muscles, yeah? It would be a bored little bird. That's funny. Yeah. So we can tell a lot about ourselves too when we track our behavior via the little bird. Yeah. The little bird does not lie. I know a lot of people will email me like a year or two after we worked together, like, that little bird, it's a son of a bitch. It's like, yeah, he is. He's always there. So let's talk about how we address some of these habitual positions, how we can mitigate some of the consequences. These practices are not sexy. I see very few Instagram posts about these practices, and yet I have clients who build careers out of these practices. People in personal training, yoga, movement coaching, they will throw out the toolkit and just use these practices because they work. They're not sexy, but they work. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, and you just do these things, your body will feel drastically different in 30 days' time. So that's fun. So number one, again, let's strip away the bad before adding stuff to it. Start simply by reducing time spent in a chair by 30 to 60 minutes every day. It's that simple. You may have seen my little Reclaim the Floor ebook. You probably hear me talk about this ad nauseum. Can't say it enough. Sitting on the floor will force your body to adapt in very different ways, right? It's going to be uncomfortable at the start. So you can have like a bolster under you. You could sit on cushions or blankets, but it's going to be a little uncomfortable. This is what we're looking for. Comfort is what led us here, by and large, in a number of ways. Not always, but often. That little bit of discomfort, that little bit of sense of, yeah, my hip doesn't like being there, and I'm going to bring myself, okay, that's a little better. Just that little shift introduces new loads to all of the cells within your body, yeah? Particularly within the tightest areas of the body, right? Like hips, back, all of that. So it's that simple. You can watch Netflix, eat a meal, check emails, read a book. Anything you would normally do in a chair, on a couch, whatever, you just do on the floor. I wish it were more complicated because I would make a lot more money talking about it that way, but alas, this works. So truly, you just sit on the floor. As a bonus, if you want to take a little further, you'll see I've got a little thing linked here for you too. I'll send out the doc so you can check out that link. But we talk about the BOR framework, a lot of my clients and I. In the floor sitting practice, you can get a nice joint multivitamin and a neurological boost by going through a three-part framework here. Breathe, orient, and reach. So within each new position, maybe you've got your legs over to one side, maybe you're in a kind of a cowboy squat, maybe you're in a full squat, maybe you're kneeling, like whatever the case is, you start by breathing. And I would recommend exhaling before inhaling. Like make sure that you can reduce all of the tension built up within your system. So are you able to breathe easily within each of these shapes, right? Again, squat, kneel, side sit, just start there. As we already hinted at, whenever we catch the breath, it's a good sign that we're not moving within a range of motion we control, that we're having to work extra to do this. On the floor, can we sit in any posture? Yes. Good question, Christine. You can lay down, you can be in different positions, you can be in transitions between those. Yes, any position. Squatting, side sitting, the tailor sit, the sort of butterfly sit, cross-legged, reclining on your belly, on your back, like all of these different shapes. The short answer is make all of the shapes. Each of those is loading all of the cells in your body in very different ways, right? And go figure, they're adapting to those loads. So great clarification. And this framework is actually going to help you explore those different positions. So once you breathe within each of those shapes, or, you know, if I'm breathing here in this sort of half kneel, half squat position, I can orient. What that means is basically look around. Now, as I look around the room, as we'll talk about, this has a very significant neurological benefit for my system. But there's a mechanical benefit too, where every time I look around the room, all of these cells in my body, again, are getting loaded in different ways. So it's pulling me into subtly different positions. And if I look far enough, I will actually shift position altogether. Yeah, I'll come into a side sit, where I look back over heel and I'm back up in this kneel position. Yeah. I'll get to that next question in a second. So the third part of this framework is reaching, right? So I'm breathing, I'm looking around the room, and I can reach out through space too. I can reach up overhead. And again, what I'm doing is introducing this entirely new load to my system. I'm opening up a tremendous amount of range in a very easy, very organic way. Go figure. This breathe, orient, reach framework is how we developed as infants, right? This is how we developed our movement capacity in the first place. Looking around the room, finding something we wanted to put in our mouths, reaching for it, ow, and then on to the next thing. Yeah. If it worked for us at the start, if it was effective at creating the neurological connections that we required to stand upright, it works for us now too. I remember in school, I could study in a desk, I'd wait to go home so I could, yeah, right? Like we feel it in our bodies, all of the consequences of our habitual environments. And yeah, go figure, Christine, that's exactly it. We feel these things, and something in us craves something different. Yeah, I don't need to get too mystical with that, but safe to say we feel it. The self-regulatory capacity within us knows that something is off and yearns for something different, right? So again, there's another thing that I've linked in here. I'll send it to you guys in the doc afterwards. So that's practice number one, is that floor sitting practice. Number two, this kind of goes to what we talked about of even lying down is okay. Spend 10 minutes in constructive rest every day. And this is really simple. It's a fancy way of saying lie on your back with your legs bent and your feet flat on the floor. For a lot of people, they'll find having a cushion under the back of the head is very, very effective. What I can do is I'll link in a video here in the doc too, a little breakdown of it. What you're doing is basically normalizing the curvature of your spine in this sense. You're letting gravity do the work of fixing your posture for you, rather than you having to consciously like shoulders down and back, chin, okay, here, yep, okay, I'm upright this way. And then as soon as you stop thinking about it, you lose it. This 10 minutes of constructive rest each day can help, again, normalize the way that your body finds its sort of neutral resting alignment. It's really simple. Lie on your back, 10 minutes, maybe a little cushion under the back of your head. Little cushion, yeah. Feet flat on the floor, knees bent. That works wonders for hip tension, low back, all of that. Again, super simple, not very sexy because you are just lying there. But again, you let gravity do the work for your posture in that case. The third one that I find very helpful for folks, it's kind of like the floor sitting of the upper body, something that I call 3D hanging. And you can just do 10 minutes throughout the day. 60 seconds here, 60 seconds there. What you do is you grab hold of a door jamb, a railing, a tree branch. It's probably the best way to do it. Tree branch, a friendly passerby on the street. You grab hold of that thing and you lean yourself away from it, right? So it's not just hanging with your arms overhead, although that's great too. This is you lean yourself away from it. And then what you can do is just breathe, orient, reach. Simple framework. You look around within that position and you look here, you look over there. As I move myself around this anchor point, I'm loading all of the tissues of my shoulder and my ribs and my spine, again, in very different ways. And if you find what feels like a really good stretch, Just take a few moments to breathe there too. And your body will adapt, yeah? So that 3D hanging is you grab hold of a thing, you lean away from that thing, and you move around that anchor point. Again, not particularly Instagrammable, but it works. Better breathing, better posture, improved shoulder range of motion. It's really just a wonderfully effective practice. And then the fourth thing that I could recommend to you guys here is just 15 to 20 minutes of barefoot time at least once a week. Reason being that 25% of the bones in your body are from the ankles down. Like there's a lot going on in the feet. And unlike a lot of the other parts of the body where like we can train those things, we can move them around like this, those intrinsic joints within the feet only get the mechanical nutrients they need when they have pressure coming up into them, right? Like every step you take barefoot deforms the foot in some way. It changes the shape of your foot. When you do that, all of those little joints in the foot go, yay, we love this. Thank you for taking us out of the shoes. It's really, really good stuff. Again, your feet are your foundation. They're how your body organizes in the pull of gravity. They're the first bit of information you get in every step. If you want to be better in upright, I mean, we'll put it this way. You spend a lot more time on your feet than on your hands or than in any other position, yeah? So if you can improve the function of your feet, it's going to have a monstrous effect on your quality of movement overall. Certainly more than kicking yourself up into the wall on a handstand. You know, handstands are fun too, but if we're looking for long-term benefits, raising the floor, just focus on the feet, and it's going to go a tremendous distance for you. You might consider as an example typing with oven mitts. It's basically what we do when we're walking around with thick-soled shoes every day. It's not good for us because every part of our body has to do a little bit more movement when those joints of the feet don't move. So basically, if our feet aren't moving the way they should, we're asking every other part of the body to pick up the slack for those lazy guys down there. It gets to be very problematic, particularly for people's low backs, I find. So if you have back stuff, this is a really simple way to move forward with it. So let's consider this, that your body adapts to psychological and social demands as well. We don't have enough time in this presentation to get into all the nitty-gritty of trauma, of personality assessment through movement, all of that. But you adapt to psychological, emotional, social factors in your life too, on a physical level, right? Easiest way to consider that is like, what do you do when you get stressed? Your body just clenches up, your shoulders raise, your breathing gets shallow, you contract a little bit. We can't help but respond to stress and emotional, social things. These are stressors for a lot of folks. So what we must do, again, for the sake of raising the floor, is reduce the burden of stress on the body. Now, what I have linked there is really potent practice for that. Most people who go through that will take a stress level from like an 8 down to a 0, sometimes only a 3, but still significant. So I'll show you a cool shift you can do to reduce the stressful burden of the environment toward the end. But for now, let's consider the traffic light analogy. It's kind of a rough analogy the way your nervous system works. There's a red light, and that's safety. You must stop if your body doesn't feel safe. Yeah, it's like you do not get to pass go in that case. Safety is the fundamental need of the nervous system. Survival is number one. Yeah, not the to-do list, not your wishes for the way your body operated, all of that. The nervous system cares about survival first and foremost. So safety must be established. That orienting practice we did, we'll talk about that more in a second, but that's a really potent way to establish that sense of safety. Now, function is kind of the yellow light in this scenario. It's like, okay, you can go, but be careful, like, look around, but you're still moving in that case. Yeah. I know that's not how yellow lights work in traffic, but whatever, we get the gist. So that function component is basically, can you go through the motions? Like, can you get from point A to point B? Can you do all the things you need to do on any given day? It's a pretty effective way to be for a lot of folks. I mean, like, you can get a lot done in the world with a relatively dysregulated nervous system. Yeah, like if you can go through the motions, put one foot in front of the other day in, day out, fine. You can get stuff done, you can climb the ladder, you can make new things, it's great, but it's not all of what's possible for you. That's where the green light comes into play too, and that's variety. Yeah, variety, novelty, that's where our neurological function goes through the roof. It's where we thrive. That's where all of the good stuff comes from, yeah? But it depends on a foundation of function, which depends on a foundation of safety. So for the sake of raising the floor, again, I'd like to circle back to that practice of orienting and add a little twist to it. Some of you guys might be familiar with here. So to establish a sense of safety, it's quite easy. You can take 60 seconds, 90 seconds, however long. And again, simply look around the room. Maybe take a nice exhalation for yourself. Breathe out. You breathe in whenever you feel like you need. And as you're looking around the room, it's silly, but you can remind yourself, oh, there aren't any dragons here. And there aren't any tigers about to jump out at me. And there's no wolf pack under my desk that's threatening to rip me limb from limb. There's no snake over there in the corner. I don't see any scorpions up there on the ceiling. I'm like, oh, okay. Nothing here is threatening to get me. Safe. Yeah. So as you try that, again, we might go back to that fundamental practice of attune and attend. And I'm curious, what do you notice about yourself as you go through that practice? For most people, they'll find that it's a significant down regulation of like all of their frantic kind of tizzy qualities. I see another question here. Christine, how important is barefoot time directly on the earth? Second floor apartments, often barefoot. Yeah, Christine, good question. What we're looking for is those little shifts. Flat surfaces barefoot won't do you a whole lot of good. It's maybe better than the soles of the shoe, but we do want diverse terrain underfoot so that we get those little changes there. So grass, mulch, a rocky path, whatever the case might be. Packed dirt is pretty good too. But anyway, this no dragons orientation kind of approach. What we're doing, again, is reminding our system that we are safe. I would recommend this before anytime you have to give a big presentation, before anytime you've got an important project coming up, anytime you've just gotten in a fight with your partner, or you can sense you've got a tough conversation coming up. Remind your system that you are safe. At the very least, then, you get yourself out of that horrible, like, freeze kind of state. You start to open up the possibility of engaging in the world around you. Safety comes first and foremost. So, another way that you might do this, after you have oriented yourself to your surroundings, after you've reminded yourself that this is safe, one thing you could do as a little refresh for your nervous system is simply take one hand and lightly tap along the other arm. Yeah, just along your forearm, along your upper arm, the inside edge, the outside edge. You're kind of waking up. It's a light movement. You don't need to slap yourself, but you're waking up all of the little neurological connections, getting your brain and body talking to each other a little more effectively. So you just go through that and you tap along the shoulder, along the arm, and you could do that for a few seconds, then pause and check in and notice the difference between your two arms after you've done that for a little bit. Likely, they feel a little different. One feels bigger or brighter. It feels more a part of you than the other. Yeah. You could go through that on the other arm too. You could go through that along the torso, the abdomen. You could go down each leg, and you're just lightly kind of tapping just to say, hey, wake up, wake up. Like you're giving yourself little nudges. And in doing so, you're really alerting your system to what's going on. You're bringing a lot of new feedback into the system. Again, all of which is likely letting you know that, it's safe here. Yeah. That's the key. Again, what we're looking for is raising the floor, not some profound breakthrough and all of this stuff. Believe me, the more we raise the floor, the more those profound things just kind of unfold. That's an emergent phenomenon from improving the overall quality of our system. Yeah. Now, the reason why I hinted at, like, notice the difference between one arm and the other after doing that is that the way that your nervous system learns and operates is through discernment. It's through noticing differences between this and that, between what it's like to stand up while slumping versus unslumping. Yeah. When we can notice those differences, we create a really profound stimulus to our system. That's how we learn. Yeah. So it's worth just putting a pin in that, like reiterating and saying, it is important to notice the before and the after. When you go through that what now, what next kind of practice, circle back and check in. What's different now than when I started? My mood's different. I'm more relaxed. I'm less jittery, all of that. That's how we learn. That's how we really groove these changes into our system. Yeah. So that stuff by itself is going to go a long way for you. It's the foundation of who you are. All of this body stuff, that's going to go a long way. It's not sexy, but again, it doesn't matter how high your peak is if you plummet afterwards. What we're talking about here is raising the floor and focusing on rolling averages. So let's talk about minds. And I know that we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to try and cruise through the rest of this a little more quickly. So basically, mind, you can imagine it's divided between conscious and unconscious. Yeah. We might think of this as the constructed self, your self-image, and the adaptive unconscious, as it's often known in literature. And the tip of the iceberg analogy kind of works, but realistically in the psychotherapeutic tradition, the generally agreed on thinking is that the unconscious isn't an iceberg, it's the endless ocean all on its own that the iceberg is in. It goes on and on and on and on and on. We don't have a whole lot of time to dig into all of the workings of that here, but I do want to give you a couple of things you might work with. So together, these two create what we think of as kind of the mind, right? And they function, again, to survive and to thrive amidst the demands of the world. And the way we do that, as I've hinted at already, is by learning what works and what doesn't work, right? That's how we learn how to behave. It's how we learn how to carry ourselves. It's how we learn what's appropriate. All of these kind of social norms, these internalized attitudes, these perhaps limiting beliefs that we may have developed over the years, if you want to call them that, those are learned responses to the world around you. Yeah, we work through pattern recognition. And feedback, as we talked about even in the neurological part, is key. There's another little video there linked for you guys. I'll send that over too. Now, the feedback loop within the mental process, within the stuff that we consider mind, the most elegant way I've seen it organized is something called the OODA Loop, developed by John Boyd. He was a fighter pilot. He was a military strategist, really brilliant fellow in a lot of ways. And this OODA loop that he developed was basically looking at what happens in a dogfight scenario. Two planes flying around trying to shoot each other down. Who's going to win? It's whoever can go through this cycle most quickly, most effectively. This cycle is observe, orient, decide, act. Now we observe, we take in sensory information from the world around us. Orienting is typically that unconscious part. It's the background processing of that sensory information. We decide, this brings it back up to the conscious level. What should I do here? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Okay, I'll do that. I act. And then I do that thing, and I expose myself to a whole new world, basically, to observe, right? So we go through this ongoing feedback loop of observe, orient, decide, act. Now, Boyd was smart enough to recognize that, well, obviously we simplify the world. I don't know why I had to put that note in there. But we simplify this. Our mental map of what we see is not the world as it is. We take in different parts of the world. We filter out the rest. Now, Boyd was smart enough to know that the orientation is the most important step. That background processing is basically the governor on the system. If you want to improve mental function, if you want to improve your emotional well-being, if you want to improve all of what we consider the aspects of the mind, it comes down to this orientation step. That's the rate limiter here. Now, orientation is basically, Boyd called it the repository of all of your genetic heritage, your life experience, your cultural background. It's all of the things that influence the way you see the world around you. In our work, we might simplify it and say it's a combination of the neurological maps your brain has of your body and your own personal narrative, right? So it's the way that your brain sees your body in space, doing whatever it is you're doing. And it's that ongoing story you tell yourself about yourself. These are the components of orientation. These are the things that influence how you do everything you do. Not only what you do, but how you do it. Now, this part's really important. I want to make sure you guys here live are still tracking with me. Does this make sense? The importance of this orientation step. We're going to talk about how to shift that in some pretty significant ways. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to assume that that part's good. Now, as an example, a little video here linked for you. People who are overweight will estimate that a hill is higher than people who are of a lower weight, right? There have been a number of research studies showing this sort of phenomenon, basically that a person's physical capacity influences their perception of the world around them, and that people who are overweight perceive the world as harder to move through than people who are of a lower weight. Your body, your physiological state influences so much about what you see in the world around you, about what you see as an obstacle versus an opportunity, what you see as a threat versus something that's enjoyable, right? For most people, they look around the world and they just see, well, trees. Oh, it's a tree, okay. Maybe it's even just a pain in the ass thing if it's like putting leaves on your yard and you have to rake them up, all of that. For people who like climbing trees, myself included, it's like, oh, wow, that's a good grip there. I could climb up to that. I could go over there. I only see it that way because I have spent time moving that way. I only perceive the tree that way because I have engaged with it that way. For other people, they'll look at it and say, oh, that's a red oak right there. And okay, because it's a red oak, it has this effect on the ecosystem and yada, yada, yada. They'll see different connections because they've engaged with it in a different way, right? So what we perceive in the world around us, like that orientation step is our perception of the sensory information. What we perceive is influenced by what we do in the world. That perception and action feedback loop are tight. If we want to create a life of more opportunity for ourselves, we must engage in different ways. We have to ungunk the gears of this orientation step. Now, luckily, those steps we talked about before on the physical practice, those are going to do a lot to address the body maps. Like if you just go through those for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, however long, you're going to find that life feels very different for you at that point. Go figure. It is easier to engage in the world when we move better. It opens up new possibilities for us when we move better. So that's going to go a long way. The narrative part of it is another story. Couldn't resist. I actually couldn't think of a different way to say that, but the personal narrative is another story altogether, corny joke aside. Now, The elements of an effective story. I see something about "and bodies in pain." Jennifer, if you could clarify what you mean by that for me, if that's a question, I'm happy to address that. But for the time being, the elements of an effective story, a good story, one that we would go see that movie, a book we would read, are bearability, direction, and coherence. These are the components that make up a good story. These are the components of the story that we would like to live into. And if we're not sure about that, we could invert it. And we could imagine life as unbearable, as aimless and jumbled, right? That is not a good story. Yeah. This is a really simple thing you can do in a lot of ways. Inverting these ideas is a good way to make a lot more sense then. So again, imagine life as unbearable, as aimless, and as jumbled. It's not a good story to live into. That's the floor. That's where a lot of people spend their time. Yeah, Jennifer, I see what you mean. Bodies in pain would see limits in the world too. Absolutely. Yeah. So what we want to do here is raise the floor, reduce our suffering, like eliminate as much risk as possible. So when we look at the unbearable qualities of life, because inevitably we will get to a point where life feels unbearable, or at the very least, pretty damn hard. Yeah. The world isn't always going to work in our favor. And we can organize our life hoping for the best, and that's fine. But if we're not mitigating our risks, it's like putting your head in the sand. So when things are unbearable, or even if they're just trending that way, what I find a really simple way to shift how we're engaging is simply asking, well, okay, why am I not worse off? Because when life is a mess, I don't know about you guys, but I've been in messes before, where I look around and all I can think is, how did everything get so shitty? Like, why is everything so awful right now? That's not a very effective thing to be asking, because we can't help but find answers to the questions we ask. So we'll find all sorts of reasons and all sorts of examples of how shitty life is, if that's what we're looking for. A more effective question that at least puts us in a more constructive, perceptual frame of reference is, why am I not worse off? What we do in that case is we begin to identify, what are all of the little things that I do have going for me, all the little resources. And I want to take a step back and say that this isn't to force yourself into a state of gratitude and like all of that for these things, because maybe you're low enough that you can't find that within you. I don't know if anyone has ever suffered from like a really crippling depression, but the advice of a gratitude journal smacks you in the face when you're in that state. But a question of, okay, why am I not worse off? It's not as saccharine. It's not as feel-goody. It's a little more utilitarian and pragmatic in some ways too. Because what we do here, again, is we bring to our conscious awareness some of the resources that we have available at our disposal. Yeah. When I ask why I'm not worse off, it's like, well, I do have a place to sleep. I've got a girlfriend who loves me. I've got a family who loves me. Okay. I've got these friends. I've put a lot of time into learning all this stuff. Okay, yeah, so it doesn't fix the situation, but it does bring to light a number of resources that you can tap into, and go figure, that makes life a lot more bearable. Yeah. As for aimless, I can't tell you the number of people who send me emails or Facebook messages who are just going in circles, like kind of wandering, lost. They don't have a sense of direction. The metaphors here are really apparent. Like, again, they're spinning themselves in circles. They don't have a direction. They don't know what's right for them. They don't know what options they have left, all of that stuff. That's a fun area to explore too. But when we're in that sense of we can't actually tell what's up from down, we're unable to tell what the right path is for us, how to move forward from here. you can always circle back to the idea of what now and what next. Yeah. You don't need to figure out your grand life plan necessarily, but you do want to figure out some way to get yourself moving out of the situation you're in, right? When in doubt, you could also just trust the system with 3.5 billion years of tinkering behind it, and that would be the evolutionary background of your nervous system. We move toward pleasure and away from pain. Now, a way that I help my clients figure this stuff out is the sort of yuck-yum practice you guys might be familiar with. But even here, as you're sitting here, you might take a pencil and a piece of paper, if you have one handy, and you draw a big circle in the middle of that piece of paper. Now, on the inside of that circle, you write out everything that is nourishing for you, that you want more of in your life. Maybe it's more time with friends, maybe it's more money, maybe it's more time outside, maybe it's more steak, maybe it's more coffee, more naps, whatever the stuff is that you like. You can tell where my head's at with steak and naps, and it sounds great. On the outside of that circle, you write all the things that feel noxious for you, that you want less of in your life. Nagging, stupid emails, spam emails. I want less time in the city. I want less, whatever stuff for you. It's a really simple way just to organize, like, oh, what is yum and what is yuck? That alone can impel you into some sort of action, because again, we can't help but move toward pleasure and away from pain. So when you can acknowledge and bring awareness to what is pleasurable and what is painful in the general life sense, not necessarily like, oh wow, that feels so good, but like what's nourishing, what's constructive, what you want more of, you will begin to organize your life to move you in that direction. I don't know that I can explain exactly how that works, but I know that it does work. So let's move on to jumbled, because jumbled is a challenging one too. It's admittedly the most difficult one to address because, we can look around and see that the meaning crisis is one of our society's biggest challenges. It's hard to make sense of the world. A lot of the times there's bad stuff happening. This is what drives me nuts about the Utopia Syndrome and the whole personal development world. It's like, okay, explain the bushfires. It's challenging to make sense of that, to make a constructive meaning out of that, to keep going in the face of suffering. This is admittedly the hardest part to address in all of this practice, right? When we're looking at what makes a good personal narrative, this one's challenging. I don't have any easy answers, but I can tell you that putting into practice the things we've talked about so far on measures of purpose in life, of self-acceptance, all of this, my clients tend to see improvements around 69, 70% of these things. Like we have some of the robust measures of psychological well-being. These practices we've talked about so far, they move you in a good direction. They help you make sense of it. Again, I don't have a great example or explanation of how that works. My hunch is that quite literally it's how we make sense of the world. These words we use are meaningful. Yeah, we make sense of the world around us through our sensory experience. We make meaning out of the world through that too. When we come home to ourselves more effectively, when we remove the stuff that's inhibiting us and gunking our gears and all of that, we're able to engage more effectively. We're able to find opportunity where there was only obstacle before. It's pretty profound when we see this in action. Now remember, all of what we've just talked about here in the mind section is here to ungunk that orientation step, which allows you to shed some of the old perceptions, to think and act in novel ways, to at least question and dismantle some of the old structures you've seen the world with before. In very concrete ways, I should say, not merely in head games. What this does is it allows you a new level of responsiveness, of creativity, presence to the real world as opposed to the fantasy world of your imagination. Yeah. A client of mine basically described the work we were doing as this. It's like, I feel like I'm in the real world instead of fantasy, and the real world's way better. I thought, well, yeah, good, great. That's exactly what this is all about. It's actually connecting us to the world, the people in it, the places and spaces we spend our time in very significant ways. So let's talk about the environment part, because I know that, again, I'm just checking the time here too. We've been at it. Good for you guys for sticking with it. So let's talk about environment. All of this is basically so that you have a better experience of yourself in the world around you, right? Like that's why you're here watching this now, is so that you can make life better for yourself. Yeah, it's okay to be to be organized around yourself. That's selfish. It's like, well, yeah, so that you have a better go of things. When you do that, you're able to be better for people around you. But yeah, you've got to take care of your own stuff first. And this environmental influence is actually a pretty common thread through philosophy, through science, through the arts. You might consider it Heraclitus, way back like pre-Socratic philosophical traditions in Greece, had this beautiful line, no man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and it's not the same man. Speaking to it like an early cultural understanding about our changing relationship with the world around us. Yeah, that the world is different, that we are different, that we engage in different ways over and over and over again. On the scientific side, we have the idea of Lewin's equation. Kurt Lewin was a behavioral psychologist looking at how people act. Basically, are there, quote, good people? Are there, quote, bad people? Are there criminal people? Are there charitable people? And he found it wasn't so simple. Lewin's equation here basically stands for the idea that behavior, the B, is a function of a person within an environment. We act in different ways in different environments. Yeah, I'm acting a little bit differently with you guys than I will with my friends later today, than I would with my girlfriend, than I do with my parents, than I did with my boss when I had a boss way back when. Oof, way back when. The places and spaces and people around us, the environments where we spend our time, influence our behavior, both socially, psychologically, but physically too. We move differently in different spaces, right? It's very weird to see someone sitting on the floor in a coffee shop. I know, because of how many weird looks I used to get. Again, certain environments lend themselves to different movements, different attitudes, different ways of engaging, all of that. So it's important to keep in mind how much your environment may be impacting you now. And then on the artistic side, Thoreau wrote in Walden this beautiful line, dwell as nearly as possible in the channel in which your life flows. Basically speaking to the idea that if you can organize your environment around you to be as near to that in which your life would be just flowing around you, you almost can't help but get caught up in the river in that case. So let's talk about how that might look. There's this zookeeper exercise, and this is what I hinted at before as a way to really reduce the stress of your day-to-day life. You might consider, if you were a zookeeper tasked with making an environment for this animal called you, what would you put in it that would be the most enriching for this animal? Under what conditions would you thrive? Now, this is an important question. It's not, what would be cool for you? It's not like, oh, what would be okay? It's like, truly, what are the conditions in which you would thrive? It's worth holding on to the ideal. We can't always pursue the ideal. We may never have the ideal. But it's worth at least knowing what are the things in my environment that would make me a little better off. Like I know for me, time outside is big. Time by the water is big. Something simple like a clean desk is huge for me. Like if I can just clear off all of the clutter on my desk, whoa, way better. Like I see there's a little pile of things here now, and I'm just gonna push those over. And even that little bit of space there is like, yeah, that looks way nicer. Now, granted, I have to clean those things up later. It's not always a simple thing, but my desk looks great right now. And that puts me in a really nice mood. So what other conditions would you need in order to thrive? Who are the people you would want to spend the most time with? Where would you want to spend the most time? What sort of work would you be doing in that case? I mean, all of this factors in. Even like, how do you like to sleep best? For me, it's like a cool, dark room, a little fan going, maybe some of those kind of Brain FM tracks in the background. Like, that's kind of nice. But like, what do you need? A weighted blanket too? Whoa, my sleep game thrives when I'm in that environment. So you just write these things out for yourself, and then you figure out like, okay, what's the littlest step I could take to bring a bit more of that into my life? And I would encourage you this afternoon or evening or whenever you're watching this, go do that little thing for yourself. And take a moment then to check in and discern, well, what shifted there? Now that I cleaned off that little part of the desk, it's like, yeah, that whole visual field is now open, and that's really nice for me internally. So that's one thing. The other, we can think back to the idea from Alfred Lord Tennyson, that self-reverence component, yeah? So how would you treat yourself? Or how would you treat somebody else, yeah? How would you treat someone you truly thought could have a profound impact on the world around them? If there were someone that you were behind 100%, giving everything you could to support them, someone who you thought, like, I don't know, who you think can have a profound impact. Maybe you're the Elon Musk type. Maybe you are Jane Goodall type. Like, whoever you think could have a profound impact on the world. Pick any of your heroes that you would like be all in for. How would you treat them? What would you do for them? What would you make sure they never had to put up with? It's like, okay, if I could think of someone who could truly have a profound impact, they would never have to put up with like not having groceries stocked. What a stupid thing. They would always have nourishing food available for them. Duh. They would never have like nights where they didn't sleep well. That would be crazy. If there was something I could do to make sure they slept well, like, yeah, I'm going to make sure that guy can do that. And good grief, like, I don't want him to be a stress basket. I'm going to make sure he's got like the supports in place. He's got therapeutic supports. He's got like self-care. So like all of these things. How would you treat someone who could have a profound impact on the world? And this is important. How are you treating yourself differently? What's the gap between what you tolerate for yourself and what you'd be willing to do for someone that you really did think could have a profound impact? What I can tell you is that my life has gotten much, much better since I started trying to close that gap for myself. Like, it took a good long look in the mirror and a lot of patience to start to bridge that gap. But again, we don't respond linearly. It's not like you do a little bit for yourself and it gets a little bit better. It's like you do a little bit for yourself and whoo, you get this incredible shift in your life. So it's worth tinkering with your environment that way too. Now, a simple cue for you too, as to when the world is beating you, like when the world, the environment around you is not very good, is to check your posture. Now, it's not that you need to fix your posture, right? Because that's just compulsively coping with the world in some non-productive way. We can look at three main patterns within our posture. One is collapse, right? This is kind of the default for us. Yeah. Look around and you'll see more people than not collapsing in some way. It's not always so obvious as like, I'm slumped over. But like, there are a lot of people who look like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. The moment you notice that you are collapsing, it's a really good sign that the world is crushing you in some way, right? In some existential way, the world is too much for you at this point. to engage at the level you're trying to engage. So my simplest advice is give up in that case. If possible, I know it's a weird bit of advice, but like if I'm collapsing, if my body is giving me the signal that I don't have the resources anymore to be upright, just lie down on the ground. Again, it's not always possible to do that then and there. Like maybe you have a job, maybe you have a team you need to be present for, all of that. But when you notice that you're collapsing, what can you do to give yourself a little more support? That constructive rest practice we talked about before is a really good way to get yourself back into your own sense of intrinsic support. So when you notice this collapsing, it's okay to take care of yourself. It's okay to take a step back from the situation, to attend to your own needs until you're able to more effectively engage, right? Now, what a lot of people will do when they notice themselves collapsing is they'll prop themselves up. And it's partly because of social norms, compulsive behavior, but like they're leaning their head on their hands in a meeting, or they've got like an arm over to the side for support, or they've got their elbow on the desk to kind of hold themselves up. They're propping themselves up in this case. Some people will also prop just by like, ugh, I'm gonna stiffen up my posture, get my back straight, all of that. And that's like they've wedged this rod up their ass along their center line to be present and accounted for and culturally appropriate. It's not very effective. Your body will rebel against that over time. It reminds me of an example. I was teaching a workshop in London, and at the very start, like within the first 10 minutes, these two guys were leaning their heads on their hands, and one guy was like leaning over on his arm, one guy was just propping himself up, and they were frantically scribbling notes. And I just looked at them and I was like, hey, fellas, would you like to lie down for a few minutes? We can keep going. It looks like your body is giving up right now. Would you like to lie down? And so they tried it. And I kept talking, like the lecture part kept going. And each of them got back up after a few minutes and paused the lecture and checked in. And I was like, hey, so fellas, how are you doing at this point? Like, way better, alert, I'm present, I'm here. I was like, okay, cool. Do you feel like you missed anything from the lecture? No, like I could still hear it. I'm still processing. Well, great, okay. So anytime you notice this prop, again, is a really good opportunity to take better care of yourself. It's a really good sign that the world is crushing you, but you're feeling some compulsion to stay focused and engaged. I can tell you, you're not engaged if this is how you're organizing yourself. You're just not. What we're looking for, ideally, is a quality of yielding. It's where I actively know the support underneath me and I say hello to it. It's like I'm aware of the chair and I say hello to the chair, or the floor underneath me. It's like, oh, hi, yeah, here I am. I can feel the support lifting me. I forget who it was earlier that said, it's like the atmosphere was lifting me up to stand. That's a really good example of someone who's yielded and found their support. The way you might do this is a simple example. If you imagine an hourglass and all the grains of sand in that hourglass, imagine you have millions of grains of sand within your body. Pay attention to where you feel contact with the support underneath you, whether it's the chair or the floor. But if you would, imagine pouring slowly but surely more and more of those grains into those places where you feel that contact. As you imagine, you could close your eyes, they could be open, whatever works for you. If you imagine pouring more and more of that sand into those places of contact, if you could get heavier and heavier into those places, weighting yourself more and more into those areas of contact, what do you notice happening higher up through the body? For most people, when they go through this, they find that the more sand they pour into those areas of contact, it frees up so much freedom to move up above. It's like, wow, My back and my shoulders just let go. I am anchored. I am rooted. I am here. And go figure, there's a pretty profound emotional and psychological consequence of that too. Do you guys get an experience like that? Anyone here have something similar? I would love to hear on the chat or the question box how that is for you and if that makes sense. But these postural patterns cue us into what our body is telling us about the situation. It's kind of the canary in the coal mine idea, right? If we're collapsing, something about the situation we're in is too much for our capacity right now. If we're propping, it's just because of some internal sense of compulsion, like I've got to be here and keep doing this thing. Yeah, that's mental chatter embodied, is this propping quality. But if I can find my support and yield into it and be here with you guys, it's a very different thing. I mean, if you watch back through the recording, if you can see me, it's very rare as I'm going through this that I'm collapsing, yeah? The bulk of this is like, oh, I know where the floor is underneath me. I know where I am in relation to the world around me. And it helps me engage in a very different way. It gives me a clearer sense of focus, better attention regulation. Christina, realized feeling agitated, laid down in constructive rest, poured sand into the lower back, mind felt uplifted and refreshed immediately. Yeah, it's so simple. Yeah, Lisa, you're a slumper. It's a good one to pay attention to. It's so obvious when we know what to look for in these situations, right? So do note that for yourself. In particular, as a fun game, you might pay attention to what situations, even if you think about them, you'll notice this. What situations or what people in your life lead you to collapse? That might be a bit of uncomfortable awareness. You might very well change the landscape of your relationships. You might spend less time with those people. You might find that you do need to take a stand against those people, in which case, finding that hourglass, pouring that sand in is a very good way to take a stand for yourself. So you'll know. You'll be able to tweak your environment in really constructive ways. And so all of this is to say, we're wrapping up here, I promise. These processes, everything we've discussed so far, they work together synergistically. Again, this is not a linear process. These work in a beautiful compounding way. And that's what this ecosomatics practice is all about. It's basically alignment of the body, the mind, and the environment. It's finding clearer engagement in the world around us. And as soon as you realize that you're never done, that it's never like you're fixed, you've stopped, you've reached utopia, the pinnacle, the peak of peaks, you can put more time and energy into making the most of the process rather than the hamster wheel of like, I got to get another dopamine hit. I got to feel a little bit better about that. The process is the shortcut. There's nowhere that you're getting to because you're never done unless you're dead. Right? Like the Utopia Syndrome of the whole personal development world is doing a real disservice to people. As soon as you let go of the outcome somewhat and focus more on the quality of the process, the quality of your day-to-day engagement with the world, life's going to get a lot better for you in a lot of ways. Basically, what this comes down to is I'm a one-trick pony. There's awareness and there's intention. There's what I'm aware of now, and there's what I would like for myself. What can I do? Oh, okay, then check back in. What am I aware of now? I'd like to shift my position. Okay. How did that go for me? What was that like? How was that for me to shift my position like that? It was pretty nice. Okay, wonderful. This feedback loop is how you make every change involving the body, involving the mind, involving the world around you. We learn through awareness and intention. When in doubt, keep in mind, you can always invert the situation rather than looking at raising the ceiling higher and higher. Look for what's blocking your growth, your progress, your flow, your whatever, the key rate limiter, and see what you can do to remove that, right? Figure out what's causing the most gunkage in your gears. Pluck that out rather than worrying about putting your foot to the gas while driving with the brake on, essentially. So that's all for now. This went a little longer than I anticipated, but that's all I've got. Remember, the principles, these things we've talked about, they can be generalized, but application is unique. So if you're up for it, if you want a free way to figure out how to apply this, just go to chandlerstevens.com /10M3, and we'll pinpoint your biggest limits, come up with some personalized practices. I know some of you guys have gone through this and can maybe speak to how significant and revealing it is. But if you spend 10 minutes doing that, I'll spend 10 minutes putting together some practices for you. There is that bribe, the $5,000 bribe, and I will be very transparent with it. I'd love to know what the biggest thing you learned here is. If you share that on social, like Facebook, Instagram, if you make a little post and tag me in it, either Chandler Stevens on Facebook or at Chandler the Mover on Instagram, what I will do is send you access to the full how-to of all of these practices, the full live version of Trust the Flux program, which basically looks at the mind and the environment, and then the Ecosomatics Mobility Masterclass. Both of those were 8-week programs that I led live with a very small group, a lot of in-depth Q&A, a ton of resources there. Put together, they were both about $5,000 if you wanted them together. So if you just make a post and tag me in it, I'll send you a link to those. It's as simple as that. So with that, do you guys have any questions about this? I should say anyone watching the recording, that offer applies to you too. Just make a post, what stood out to you most from this, tag me in it, and I'll send you a message with the links. It's that easy. They're really good stuff. So do you guys have any questions? I would love for anyone here tuning in live. Really, I'm just going to the farmer's market later today. I don't have a whole lot else going on. Farmer's market, hanging with a couple of friends, but that's not for a bit. So if you have questions, I'm around. Hit me with it, whether it's a question on application, a question to clarify some of the theory. I would also love to know, do you guys feel equipped to practice this? Like, are you going to go and do these things? That's useful too. I just assume there's furious typing going on everyone's keyboards as they put all of the questions there. Who knows? What I'll do is go ahead and stop sharing here. Percolating on question wording. Yeah, all good. So let me see if I can stop sharing. There we go. Now I can see the questions much better. What do we have here? I felt like there's a lot of information. Yeah, I did want to kind of over deliver on this. And Christine, you're going to get the recording. You're going to get the Google Doc. So you can go back through. But I would say even pick like a couple of little things that stand out. And it's going to go a long way for you. Glad you don't feel overwhelmed. Definitely post. Cool. Ooh, I see new messages. Any tips for resilience when going through really traumatic stuff? Yes. So one of the things that I have linked in that doc, which I will send out after this, is a really potent process to uncouple some of our traumatic responses to situations. So what we know is that a big part of the traumatic response is basically an upcycling of our stress response, spinning higher and higher and deeper into those neurological grooves. So the way I think of it is kind of like, you know, if I get a piece of paper here, I've got this traumatic groove, and maybe it's almost like I write a little message in it. And that's a sloppy thing. But what this process that is linked in there does is basically we go through and we smudge those and makes it a little bit easier to not slip into that. But when we are looking to cultivate resilience, that too is a really key example of not raising the floor, not raising the ceiling, but raising the floor. What we're looking for, the common example is basically building a bigger bucket. Resourcing is a really key important to that. That element of safety is a really key important to that. And the more frequently we can remind ourselves of that safety and that resourcing, like, okay, there are no dragons here. All right, and why am I not worse off? That could just be a daily practice if we're going through really traumatic stuff. The other thing is that we are social animals. Like, we must heal in community. If there is an active traumatic situation, it's like, as best you're able, remove yourself from that situation and find whatever supports you have available. Open invitation, anyone going through this who has watched all of this already and is in the midst of some shit, send me an email and like, I'm here for you. There's no need to go through those things alone. That's absurd. We feel alone very often in those cases, but let me at least put a little flag out there. You're not. I've been there. Maybe not whatever you're going through, but the biggest thing to focus on in that situation is, again, raising the floor. Because when we're in that traumatic loop, it is so easy to slip even further into it. And it's a real challenge in that case. But we can raise the floor by reminding that immediately in the here and now, I am safe. And then resourcing on top of that. Okay, why am I not worse off? What resources do I have available that I might leverage more effectively? I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. What do you think? Do we have other questions? I see a few people still here live. Okay, part 1. Lisa, I imagine there's a part 2. What are your thoughts on procrastination? Yeah, that's a good one. Working on this in life, finding there's a lot of fear and discomfort around making the decisions once I start, whatever the thing is. It brings a sense of stagnancy and inertia. I bet. Yeah. Couple of thoughts. One on the more biological, physiological side, one on the, we'll say, existential soul side. It's really easy to procrastinate when we actually have physiological disturbances in the system. If we are in a traumatic loop, if we even are suffering from like a micronutrient deficiency, if we're hungry, if we haven't slept well, I think of like, take care of basic organismic needs first, then worry about some of the other stuff. But the assessment I often use is the 3S assessment, which is shit, sleep, and screw. And if we're doing those things well, our system is pretty well regulated. I would say if you're procrastinating and one of those things is off, start by just addressing those things, and the procrastination challenge is likely a matter of organismic resources from a biological sense. There's another quality of that too, though, that is, for example, if I can shit, sleep, and screw well, like if I've attended to my organismic needs and I'm still procrastinating, that begs the existential question, why are you doing this thing that your psyche can't organize around willingly? I mean, granted, we resist and we procrastinate in all sorts of ways. There are ways past that too. For example, you might just look at what are all the ways I keep myself from getting what I want. And if clear awareness of those things doesn't help mobilize action toward the thing, it's maybe worth checking in then too. Is this thing actually as beneficial for me as I think it is, or as I would like to think it is? At another workshop I was teaching, there was this girl who had this to-do list thing. Like, there always had to be a to-do list, and that was how, like, okay, it's how she organized her life, is to-do list, to-do list, to-do list. Okay, check, check, check. And go figure, when we do that, the to-do list never ends. And I asked the question, like, okay, would you be willing to try an experiment? Would you be willing to trust that you will get the important things done without a to-do list? And would you be willing to maybe consider that if they don't get done, they weren't important in the first place? I mean, we have a real way of taking care of the things that are actually important to us. Our behavior tends to demonstrate what is important to us. So the little bird is a really good friend in this case to track what you're doing. If you are just compulsively procrastinating on a thing, I would check in with organismic resources like the shit sleep screw assessment. Eat nourishing food, spend time outside, get lots of sunlight, limit your screen usage, sleep well at night, spend time with other people. Then I would take a look maybe at some of the existential, psychological, soul level elements of that. And that's maybe something we need to dig into a little bit more, because I don't know the particulars of your situation. The 10M3 could help us highlight that too, if you haven't gone through that. I can't quite remember if you did. Let's see, what do we have here? I love the basic raising the floor, definitely need to build a community. Yeah, Jen, I get it right there with you. It's a big concept. For most people, it's totally opposite to what we tend to consider. Let's see, Lisa, part 2. Once I get going, it can be pretty darn awesome with ideas flowing and work happening. Any tips, fave practice for entering the flow state? Yeah. Flow, at the most basic definition, like what Jamie Wheel and those guys are talking about, Steve Kotler, is basically the sweet spot between the demands of the situation and my organismic resources. Flow state, what I think a lot of people forget is that it's not a fixed thing. It must shift based on, again, the environment and the organism, yeah? So when my organismic resources are dwindling, that's not a word, when they're dwindling, I must reduce the demands of the situation in order to keep myself in that state of flow, yeah? Similarly, if I'm feeling good, I can take on bigger projects and keep in that flow state. It's not like a thing that I just dip into and I'm there. I think some people think it's like a fixed, again, the Utopia Syndrome is like, you're going to be in flow effortlessly all the time forever and ideas will pour out of you. And it's like, well, you're going to have to poop at some point. Like, truly, like there's real world life stuff, and it's going to pull you out of that creative flow. Yeah, I mean, pardon the low example or whatever, but like it's true. We've got to balance that dynamic of organism and environment. So when you're feeling good and you're in that, like, I would pay particular attention to what's happening in that immediate environment. Like, again, what are the conditions that are supporting you entering that state that you perceive of as like being in the flow? And what did you do the day before too? Like, what did you do to sleep well that night? Or like, what happened immediately prior to you being in this flow state? Because again, that flow quality that so many people are pursuing, oof, it's an emergent phenomenon. Like, if we have to to try to be creative, we will not be creative. That's not what creativity is. We can allow for creativity. We can facilitate creativity, but that's like, it's like breaking open the egg to see how the chick is developing. It's like, well, you killed that thing then. It doesn't work that way. What we can do is create the conditions for it. And primarily the conditions are reducing the demands of the task at hand, like maybe setting longer deadlines for yourself, taking off little chunks of the big task. Yeah, like this presentation I'm making is part of a much bigger task that I have going on in the background, but this is like, it's a pretty good chunk. I can handle this on a Sunday morning with 1 cup of coffee and be in. Also, there are some conditions in the background that supported my organismic resources, right? For me, it's like, okay, I slept really well last night. No alcohol, because that's disruptive for my sleep cycle. I did have the weighted blanket, cool dark room, fan going, Brain FM in the background. I woke up, I was still, sat by the fire, did my writing in the morning. It was like, if I thought of all the conditions that made Chandler a fat, happy animal, like, those were it. So Lisa, I would say that's probably what, pay attention to is like what's environmentally happening and what happened the night before when you got in that flow. And then see what you can do to tinker and kind of recreate that for yourself. When I create more space, more shows up. Yeah. Doing less leads to more. it's always the case. Yeah, that's why I think of this as kind of like the sourdough rules. Some of you guys saw the email or the little Instagram thing I did. Sourdough has taught me a lot. Basically, you take flour and water and you leave it out until it bubbles. And then you mix in some salt and flour and water, and then you mix that bubbling bit in there, and you just wait. And you wait. And you wait. And I remember when I first started, I got impatient, and I tried to make these loaves early, and they didn't turn out very well at all. But at this point, it's like, if I can make a loaf over the span of 48 to 72 hours, that is a really good, delicious loaf of bread. And I can eat as much of it as I want, and it doesn't make my tummy hurt at all. So going slow and allowing the process to unfold, really wonderful. And then again, strip away the non-essential stuff. Like, the best bread I've ever had is the simplest bread. If I get rid of all the unnecessary stuff, it's just like, you can bite into this thing and it almost doesn't need butter, but it's great with butter. I'll tell you that. So with that, wow, it's been almost 2 hours. You guys are champs. Do you have other questions? Anything else you're curious about, confused about, anything like that I can help you with? As I said, I really wanted to kind of pour it out for you guys on this. I know it's a lot to take in, so don't feel the need to hang around if you're tapped out. But again, I will send out the replay when it encodes and all of that, the Google Doc with all those links in it too. And then again, if you've gone through the recording and you make a post on social, just tag me in it. Let me know what the biggest thing you learned was, and I will send you links to the full Trust the Flex program and links to the Ecosomatics Mobility Masterclass. Those are, if you thought this was in depth, those are way more in depth. Each of those was about 8 weeks runtime. Small group. There's some Q&A woven into those too, so you get like a really, really deep dive into some pretty advanced concepts on these things. Lots of application. I got to roll through. Okay, Lisa, yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for participating. Take it easy, Lisa. We'll talk soon. Yeah. For everybody else, I'm around. You can sit and watch me drink water. If you have questions, thank you. Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thank you guys for participating, for being here, for diving in. This stuff is good. The world needs more people who are able to take good care of themselves. That's what really makes the world go round. So I appreciate you diving in, learning, and most importantly, I am future appreciating you guys applying this stuff. That's massive. Christine, what do we have here? Have some adrenal issues. Even can often feel them pulsing. Is there anything in addition to the unsexy practices that might help this? If you have adrenal issues, I would be inclined to not give you more to do. I'm willing to bet that you have a lot to do day to day. Start with the unsexy practices here. Start with the very basic stuff. In particular, I might skew you to start with the environmental side, like figure out, okay, conditions-wise, what do I need to feel like I'm in my optimal environment? See what little bits you can do there. Those movement practices we discussed are going to be big for you. Again, like, who was it that was asking about the resilience part? I could scroll back through. But there's a practice linked in the doc on reducing the stress burden. That's going to be really big too. So Christine, there's a bunch of stuff within the doc that I think you're going to like, and it's going to be very useful for you. I wouldn't worry about doing more in that case too. I imagine you've got a full plate, and I would say, especially dealing with adrenal issues, burnout, fatigue, all of that, it's like chew what's on your plate, the littlest bit, like chew it, digest it, integrate it, then on to the next bite. I remember when I was first introduced to Gestalt psychotherapy, when I was in sort of the kind of practice and training there, like the biggest, most profound lesson I learned was that the way I ate was compulsive, like it was inhaling. And I'd be finished eating 20 minutes before anyone I was with. It was terrible. And so the therapist I was working with basically said, hey, you might chew and take a breath in between each bite. Okay, so I'll chew. All right, on to the next one. Swallow. And wow, I did not realize, like, digestion improved a ton. Energy levels went up, all that sort of stuff. It was really incredible what all could happen with that. But I became much more discerning about how much I took in from the world around me too. Like how many people I followed on social, how many books I was reading, trainings I would go to. Because this parallel between our consumption of food and of information is, it's incredible. So I would say, yeah, chew the littlest bit that you're able to, like do less than you even think you need to do. Like even on the unsexy practices, do one of those that you feel like you could really do, like nail it, knock it out of the park. And give yourself permission to do it badly. It doesn't have to be perfect. Do that too. Then move on to the next one. Chew, digest, integrate, let it percolate, let the dust settle, and then take on the next step. That's what I would recommend. Toothless dog that can be a reminder to chew smaller bites. Oh my gosh, poor puppy. Yeah, chewing smaller bites is a good thing. Yeah, I'm glad that helped, Christine. What all do we have here? I often have bloating issues, and the bread I eat is my own sourdough. What things can I pay attention to see if it's diet-related, stress-triggered? That's a really good question that's a little outside my scope on the nutritional side. I do know that I can speak personally, we'll say that. We recently went through a bit of a gut reset kind of thing, and I started with a hard fast, about 48 hours of no food, basically just a water fast, and then a fasting mimicking diet for about 3 days, 4 days. And basically that's like, small amount of plants, small amount of animals. And that's it, like just plant or just animal. And the fasting mimicking diet, there's some really interesting research on it. It's something I've been more and more interested in for general kind of cellular health, neurological benefits. I would recommend just do a Google Scholar search of fasting mimicking diet as a good way to start. But basically it's eat a very small amount for a few days, and then you go back into normal eating. So we started this kind of gut reset exploration with that. And then we gradually introduced in different things, like introduce in alcohol, track how you feel for the next couple of days. Okay, that wasn't so great. Duly noted. And then take it out again. And then introduce in like nightshades, tomatoes, peppers, that sort of thing. For me, that was really surprising. I love spicy food. And I found that I had significant noticeable issues when I ate that in terms of congestion, in terms of brain fog, in terms of digestion. And so it was like, okay, noted, reduce that. We also dosed in a good deal of probiotics and some prebiotic things to kind of support gut flora. That's pretty profound for a lot of folks. Prebiotic, supplement to probiotic after each meal. The other thing we did that was helpful, I think, although it sounds like hippie folklore, is we took like a little bit of apple cider vinegar before dinner each night, just to help kind of the digestive process. So Ariel, those things I found really insightful, and then just kind of reintroducing those helped me figure out, okay, what does my body actually respond to? Again, it's like we need to strip away a lot of stuff, introduce the bare minimum, like, all right, strip away everything. What do I need in order to survive? Water, okay. And then a little bit of plant material, a little bit of animal material, bone broth, light soups, that sort of thing. Okay, what can I introduce on top of those essentials? Now that I've ensured I'm not going to starve or die, I can try to add this in, see how that goes. Okay, nope. All right, I'm still not starving or dying. I can introduce this back in. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, still not starving or dying. I can introduce this back in. Oh, I feel great. Okay, I'm gonna have more of that. So again, raising the floor on the food side too might be a good strategy. The stress trigger, what I tend to find for a lot of folks is that as they reduce their overall stress burden, like as they improve their neurophysiological health through some of these practices, it's a tricky area, but I've had a lot of people put autoimmune issues into remission too, just by focusing on some of these somatic practices. Reducing stress level, coming to terms with themselves more effectively. What we know from a lot of the newer emerging research out there is that there's a pretty potent link between our psychological health, our neurological health, and our immunological health. So a lot of these things that present as autoimmune issues, and this is where I might get into trouble. So I am not a medical doctor. This is not medical advice, but a lot of things that present as inflammatory disorders, autoimmune disorders, can be mitigated or put into remission through somatic interventions like this, improving psychological health, improving neurological health. And what we find is that immunological health can improve quite a bit as well. That's a challenging body of work. It's hard to pinpoint things for certain because it is so new in the body of work out there. But what we know is that these exist along axis, the psychological, neurological, immunological, our digestive health. That seems to be pretty widely accepted at this point too, though, the gut, brain, skin axis in particular, gut health and brain health and skin health. We often think of that as like fix your gut to fix depressive issues, and huge amount of literature on that, like healing the gut to deal with psychological challenges, depression, anxiety, mental acuity, all of that. But the reverse isn't often explored, of looking at improving psychological health to improve kind of the base organismic biological health. So that's something you might look into as well. Okay, we got a few people left. Any other questions you guys can think of? I'm having fun. This is awesome for me. I don't see anything there. I'll just say thanks again, you guys. It's been a lot of fun. It did go longer than I anticipated, but that was my intention, was to pour it out. So apparently that's how long I pour when I pour. But as you'll find, if you do post on Facebook, Instagram, social, whatever, as you go through Trust the Flux and the Ecosomatics Mobility Masterclass, you'll find that there is a world to explore, like within your physiological, your physical being, within the psychological side of it too. There's a lot of stuff there that's really, really potent. It's basically like, it goes as long as you're curious about yourself. That's the key thing, is when you can find some receptivity toward yourself, when you can engage with curiosity, your own way of being, there's no limit to the amount of growth that's possible. I mean, there's maybe I shouldn't say there's no limit, because it's hard to know if there's a limit, but we're so far from the limit of what's possible for our overall functioning, our overall well-being. We're so far from the ceiling on that it's hardly worth considering. It's asymptotic at best. Like, we could approach the limit. I don't know that we'd ever get there, particularly when it comes to the quality of our experience. That's the big thing that becomes really apparent the more you explore the somatic practices. When we shift ourselves from a qualitative or quantitative emphasis into a qualitative focus, there's just this world of improvement that opens up. I mean, I consider myself a very adept mover in a lot of ways. But the qualitative shifts that are possible through like little bits of attention, like deep attention to very little bits of movement. It's like an inside edge of my foot just lights up the front of my spine, and it organizes my skull in a very different way. You get to have a lot of fun with yourself when you get into this too. So at this point, I'm just kind of rambling. But Is there anything else you guys think would be useful for you at this point? If something does come up, feel free to send me an email. Chandler@chandlerstevens.com. Again, we can pinpoint these things for you in a much bigger way, because it's hard for me to give specific advice even on the questions without knowing a bit more about what we're working with. So if you go to chandlerstevens.com/10m3, that will have the link to the 10-minute mind-body map, and we can really dig into some good stuff there. And then again, those bonus resources, my $5,000 bribe, that's got a lot of stuff in there for you too. Do you think the vagus nerve is important? And if so, how to train, nurture it? Yeah, that's seems to be so. There's a lot of chatter about the vagus nerve and vagal tone and all of this at this point. I'm unsure. I think it's a well-intentioned, well-meaning hunt for another the thing. I don't think the vagal nerve and vagal tone is like the holy grail. I do think it is very tightly correlated with a number of changes that we really want for ourselves, overall organismic function. I think it probably plays a pretty primary role in our neurological health, but I don't know that it's the thing. As with ways to go about training, nurturing it, the same way you might train and nurture your entire system. What we know is that our vagal response, our overall neurological response, is incredibly influenced by environmental conditions. I mean, that's the whole thinking behind polyvagal theory, what Stephen Porges, is that basically other people's vagal tone influences our vagal tone, and we're all engaged in this mammalian signaling game with each other about safety and threat. So environmental factors are big. Again, that sense of what can you do to give yourself a better environment will be a really good way to nurture overall neurological health. Because it's important not to get too caught in a reductionist trap, right? We can oversimplify things and throw the baby out with the bathwater in a lot of ways. In general, though, other things that seem to be helpful for this would be contrast. Contrast is the foundation of learning, of neurological health. It's like high, low, this, that. One thing that I found really helpful for overall function is cold immersion in general. And that seems to be linked to a lot of the things out there on vagal tone as well, is that cold showers, or even alternating like hot and then cold in the shower in the morning, that alternation provides a really nice vascular benefit in addition to perhaps a neurological benefit. But cold immersion is one of those things that gets thrown around a lot as a pretty good strategy. That's one thing I've explored as well. I like nice long hikes in nature, maybe not for vagal tone, but just as a contrast from the busyness of modern civilized life. There's nothing that my system likes more than a nice long hike barefoot and then a cold plunge at the end of that, at the top of the mountain. That's wonderful. The little things will go a long way, though. Again, we don't need to necessarily look for big, grand things, because we don't operate linearly, right? So if we can find, we could look at this as a multiplicative system more so than an additive system. It's not necessarily this plus this plus this plus this. If we can find a 10% improvement in the desk that we spend our time at, and a 10% improvement in the quality of our relationships, a 10% improvement in our digestion and the food we eat, a 10% improvement in the quality of our sleep, those little things will create exponential shifts in our organismic function. So that's one thing you might tune into as well. I hope that's helpful, Ariel. Again, the 10M3 will be a really good way for us to figure out specific to you based on what's going on in your world, how we might fine tune that even more. So, is there anything else? If not, I think it's about time for me to go to the farmer's market. Those mushrooms and veggies and meats are waiting for me. And thank you guys for tuning into all this. This has been really fun. This has been awesome. I can't wait to see what everyone thinks of it, how it goes on the recording when I send that out. But yeah, thank you guys again. This has been great. I hope it's been helpful for you. Please, please, please do not forget, though, it all comes down to awareness and intention. It is what you are doing and what you would like to do. Yeah, the behavior change is where this really takes off. So please put this stuff into practice. Keep me posted on how the practice is going. Feel free to tag Chandler the Mover, Chandler Stevens, whatever. Keep me posted on how the practice is going. Share along the way. And as I said, there are probably 150 or so people who registered for this and will get the recording. So we've got a nice little community of folks who are going to be engaging in this. So feel free to share your practice along the way. Help other people learn from it too. And that's what it's all about. So take care, guys. We'll talk soon.